Hello everyone, welcome back to another video here on Planet Zoo in the Shizen Hogo-Ku Zoo here on our franchise mode. Welcome back. So today we're going to be bringing in a new animal, but first I do want to go over one section that I did fix. Here it is right here. We ended up fixing up this little dead spot that was right by our monorail entrance station area, whatever you want to call it, but it's toward the front of our park and we made it look very nice. Those benches that you do see right there are completely operational, and I did customize it for the scenario of where it's being put at. So that is something exciting, but let's get on to our habitat speed build. So today we are going to be bringing in the, I think it's pronounced Formosan black bear, which is actually from Taiwan. This bear is an endangered species as it is hunted very often, and due to deforestation, this bear is losing its habitat. So therefore we're going to give it a new one right here in our zoo to at least promote conservation efforts. Toward the front here, we do start it off a little bit different. I already have the walkways set up, which you may have not noticed in last video because it wasn't existing in last video. So therefore we have a different little scenario that we're going to play into. We're actually going to have a staircase that leads up to a certain area, and it's actually going to also be used as a path to get over to our panda's habitat. And we're also going to have this little elevated area where we can figure out a nice viewing place for our animals. And this is where our main shelter for our people is going to take place at. So these bears are pretty awesome. They do get stressed a lot, and I didn't really take that into account for, certain things until when I brought the people in here with the bears. So we end up doing a lot of changing with this structure, but we end up making the structure into more of a customizable structure, so we don't actually use any grid pieces, and instead we actually just make it a lot out of wood. I kind of want to make it seem like a log cabin type feel, or some sort of woodsy type feel that doesn't really involve too much stone, except for the base of where people are walking at. We also have a concrete-like wall that is toward the habitat side of where this structure is being placed in. And the reason for that is just because we have that path that is actually underneath that stone right there. And with that plaster wall, it's actually plaster, I made it look like concrete. But with that concrete wall right there, we actually have a lot of terrain difference there, and it just looked very messy. So therefore we just kind of covered it up and made it so bears can't climb up there either. And I also kind of wanted to make this a little bit more modern, so we actually end up adding in some glass panes toward the top. So we do have a little skylight, which kind of works out nice for this in a way, and I'm actually really happy about it. I'm happy with how it came out. I think those glass pieces actually, I don't know if they come from the New World pack, but they may also come from I think it's the European pack. It comes from one or the other, but we end up using everything else in there is actually from either the base game theme or it's actually from the East Asia theme. So all that wood there is actually from the East Asia theme. So we actually need this habitat to work, so we end up bringing in a keeper's hut, and this keeper's hut is also going to be toward the entrance of where our staff are going to enter this area at. It is visible from the public, although we did try to cover up a little bit more into the future, and I'll show you that later. I'm not going to spend too much time on that. I also do end up adding a solar panel in at some point, so this place actually does have a power hookup. It's not like I did anything special with the solar panel or anything, it's just sitting right outside of the building. Obviously not in the habitat, but it's sitting outside of the building, so our staff can get there and fix it up when necessary, and so that it would also reach over to our little pavilion over there for our guests, so we can actually have functional education boards and educational speakers and whatnot. Alright, and once we bring in the barrier, we actually do use a little bit of concrete barrier. We don't use, I don't think, any other sort of barrier except for where the entrance of where our staff are going to enter. Aside from that, everything is a complete null barrier, which is also just means it's an invisible barrier. And what we end up doing is we take that null barrier and just kind of outline the whole entire area that we have here. We also do have that issue right beside that building where we actually have the mountain there. And with that, we actually end up adding some rock there, so we don't have to worry about our bears trying to escape through there. And it kind of goes up against the building just a little bit, not too much to where it looks like it's going in the building, because that would look weird. But essentially we do fix this issue and it ends up working well. And we also do have this nice little bedding for our bears for when they want to go ahead and sleep. But they do need a cave to sleep in, so we build this awesome gigantic cave for them so that they are in a proper sleeping area, so they don't get rained on or anything like that. It's a nice little place for them to go over so they don't get stressed or anything like that. And it ends up working out really good for us. Along with that, there is a lot of rock that actually goes into this building. What I end up doing is I end up putting this roof with rock on it that kind of just covers it all up. And then what I end up doing from there is I take the land from the mountain and I kind of just cover over it a little bit. So therefore I can save myself a little bit of time and strain from having to put all these rocks all over the place and trying to make it look not consistent from one another. I'm trying to make it look a little bit more natural. So that is one issue when it comes to building caves and building a lot of rock structures, is that you do have a great selection of rocks, but you also do have to kind of turn it and twist it into certain ways to make it seem like it's a different rock every time and that it's not the same rock. I find that I do struggle on this a little bit here and there, so therefore we try to make sure we solve that issue by not replicating it too much. So skipping forward, we actually end up having to go back and edit our main building again because it just simply is not finished. We need to make sure our guests aren't trying to jump out and join the bears. That would be very bad, as we would all know. The bears are very shy of humans actually, but at the same time they can also be dangerous, so therefore we're going to be adding a nice little fence in. This fence is probably about half the height of a human, or should I say more of like closer to the waist level. I would say it's probably a little bit lower than the waist level, which was probably not the smartest decision, but we end up doing some changes later, which you will see. But it's completely custom made fence that does really good for us, and it ends up working out, I'd say, pretty well. And then we actually end up replicating this on the other side of the habitat, and I'll actually show you a little bit later. We end up just completely removing it, so we're going to skip forward from that. So moving on from that, we do change our focus to making the pathway look a little bit more reasonable when we come up to see our bears over toward the staff entrance side. So we just end up throwing in some rock. We put it up right against this building so it kind of flushes nicely and it doesn't seem very abrupt when it comes to actually moving into the building there from our pavement into our little stone floor. So we wanted to avoid that at all possible costs. Moving on, we build more rock structures. This is like the specialty for this area. Thank goodness these bears do live in mountains typically and very dense forests, so therefore it is perfect for their habitat regardless. But we end up putting in a lot of rock structures and we have to fix this platform up a little bit. This platform, I would say, is a nice little area, just kind of, it's almost like a small little plaza for when you're moving from maybe the panda habitat over to our bear habitat. We did originally have a staircase that actually led down to the main pathway, but I ended up taking that out because people use it as a shortcut to actually get to the panda habitat. And if we were to keep it like that, I think it would cause a lot of congestion. So I wanted to refrain from doing that. I wanted to keep them from using that original path, which is, you know, a little bit more of a longer trip. Isn't really an efficient path in order to get to the pandas. But we do have that dead space over there. I will talk about that later as well, because we may actually make another video on that little dead space that we have over there. But of course the fun part is putting up these rocks and really trying to get it to sink in with the pathway as much. We also do have those curbs that we can't get rid of because it's not actually on land, and it's actually considered a, you know, pathway that's in the sky. It's like a bridge to a certain extent, so they can't get rid of those pathway curbs. So just another reminder that it is a rocky area. We don't just want to have rock walls and have it end just there. We want some of the floor, or I should say maybe part of the ground where the bears can walk around at, to have some rocks that kind of stick out a little bit, because that would make it more real. I also did consider making a building in this general area, but how the pathways were lined up, it wouldn't work out. I tried a few different concepts, but it just, at the end of the day, wouldn't work out. So I ended up just building up the rocks some more to make it work out a little bit. I also did end up raising the land also, so would make the process a little bit easier, and I wouldn't have to build up the rocks as much to where it would look more unnatural. So once we did finish our rock wall, we actually bring in this fence. It is the most basic fence that you can find on Planet Zoo, But it is a fence that I probably like most because it is just one of those metal fences that you can basically put anywhere. So we use it so people can't go ahead and jump off the rock wall and cause a bunch of issues. We try to figure out other ways to kind of prevent people from jumping over as if that were to happen in this game. I try to put it so it's at a slant, but then I figured out that it wasn't going to work. We would actually have to build up the rocks a little bit more, and then we would also have to add a railing instead for our guests so they don't fall down and trip on stairs if they're old or just have issues walking down steps or up steps. So therefore we actually tilt these at a 90-degree angle to the side so that only one bar is shown, and then we kind of line it up with the stairs. So therefore people can climb up and down with ease with a nice little railing. So I thought that was a little bit of a nice touch that you usually don't see in Planet Zoo, is having railings for people when they go up and down stairs. So since we had that customized, I thought that was really nice. But now we move into something a little bit more special. We actually brought in our bears, and we need to really make it suitable for them. So they are both in the tropical regions and temperate regions of Asia, mainly Taiwan, and we want to make sure we give them a bunch of trees, and we really pack this thing full of trees. They don't have a shortage on trees. They have their nice awesome cave. Works out great for them. We add in a little bit of gardening right over toward the front of our little viewing pavilion, just to kind of blend it a little bit more for our animals more than just anything else. It's really not too much for the guests because they won't see it. We also have to make sure that they have enough short grass, and we obviously use dirt just so it's easier to see where there are, decent slopes and stuff like that. So therefore we end up giving them some more short grass and a little bit more of that soft dirt, which includes that leaf texture in it. They also have a climbing need, so we give them nice climbing platforms. My only concern is that these guys are shy. We actually do have an issue with this later because they don't seem to want to spend too much time near the pavilion, as guests are always flooding over there to see the bears, but the bears aren't so much over there to see the guests because they don't want the guests. So we had to make sure we kept that on the radar, and we'll get to that once again later. I assume that these bears do climb the trees, but I still gave them the platforms anyway because this is where they get their necessity from. They don't really get it from the trees so much. So I hope that I made it easy enough for them to get on these platforms. I hope that there was enough start and end point for these platforms, along with making sure that they could actually climb up it. So I would assume that they could climb up it. I haven't actually seen them do it yet because I've been focused on so many other things. But hopefully, if not, we may have to change it around and get something for, getting a good visual shot for when we actually do our little end scene with all the nice little visuals. Aside from that, we just end up bringing a lot more plants. These guys could use a ton more plants, but we just don't give it to them. But it's nonetheless better than our last habitat that we did, which I'm very happy about. I wanted to add in some more trees maybe, but there wasn't really too much room for it. I think I ended up adding a few more toward the front and try to squeeze a few small ones here and there. I'm trying to make them look a little bit more wild as well. So one thing about making these plants more wild is that we just want them to be a little bit closer together, but we don't want them too close together toward the front because that would cause the issue with the guests being able to see the bears. We don't want that to happen too much for them. And of course, we had to bring in their enrichment toys, their food enrichment, and their wonderful little toy enrichment. So they have a nice rubbing pillar. They have a little scent marker that they can sniff. They have a rubber ball type thing that is more like a cube shape. And then we also have this little tree that we kind of stuff food in, which they will try to get the food out of, which I think is pretty neat. We can always change these items in the future. That is always the purpose of them. So in case of these guys' enrichment kind of gets low, we will swap them out. But we go back to the pavilion to make some changes. This includes removing that little back fence that I talked about. I didn't think it worked out very well, just because there's no reason for people to look from the pathway over to the pavilion from there. And I didn't want my guests to get distracted at any sort of cost. We end up putting in some educational boards. I think we have in 2 sections. So we have 2 sections with the regular educational board about the animal. Then we also add our conservation boards on either side of them. So their biggest thing is deforestation and poaching and hunting and stuff like that, which I mentioned earlier. So those are the 2 topics that we put on both educational boards. And then we also end up adding some speakers. I don't know if I end up putting it on camera, but we do end up putting some speakers. At this moment in time, I also forgot that we should probably add some areas for food and water for these guys so they don't end up dying. That would be awful. The basic necessities you can't forget about. Here's the solar panel that I talked about earlier. We end up moving that just so it covers the pavilion enough. I think at the end of the day, it ends up missing like one educational speaker that we ended up adding in there. I also end up adding in some lighting, which I don't include in this video, but we end up putting in some ceiling lighting from the New World Pack. There's like that little circular ceiling light that we put in, and we also put in that East Asia little lantern on the wooden pillars toward the back for our guests so they don't walk into things and so that they can see. I also decide to put in some more little art decorations. I put in like the little bear up against the wall. I think I end up putting some leaf and like little flower art, which isn't like anything special, but it fills up the wall so it's not just bland. Let me know if you guys want me to fix this up, because I didn't really have too much of a thought based on this. I just kind of filled up the wall so it wasn't just nothing. It's the best way to put it. And then we come over toward the pathway that is in between both the main pathway that is going to be extended to the rest of the park, along with our pavilion. We end up adding some rocks. I don't think I end up finishing this area. Now I'm kind of second guessing myself. If not, we'll get to it next episode, because there's a lot going on in this episode for me to handle doing a whole new project. So we end up putting some rock in. Of course, more rock. It's the best thing you can do with these little slope areas that you really can't fix. So that's what we end up doing. If you recall, we end up using a lot of that East Asia stone that is very fixated and looks very manufactured. I didn't really want that for this area, so we end up keeping it out. We have a lot of that toward the front of the park and near the panda habitat, so we didn't want to use it too much and use it to where other areas of the park were not unique. We also brought in some palm trees. We didn't put in too much foliage, but I want to make sure our guests have some shade from the sun, so we end up putting some palm trees in. It's a little bit more on the tropical side of things right there, but once you start going out that mountain near the pandas and with these bears there, it starts to become more of a temperate region for our zoo. So that's where we're kind of putting all our temperate animals at, or at least that's the case for right now. For this building, we end up putting in some nice little ivy that climbs up and down of our building, so it makes it look a little bit more natural for our guests that are walking by. Now, something that I did off camera is the next thing that I was going to get to is our bears did not like our guests. It's just what happened. So we end up building this extended piece of one-way glass, which I try not to use, but sometimes we have to use it. In this case, I thought it was a good idea to use it. Looks a little strange. It kind of pops out the side of the building a little bit, but it still prevents our guests from actually going up to the glass and looking straight through it and causing issues. So it's a little strange. It's probably the one part of the area that doesn't really look that good, because it obviously wasn't thought of. It was like one of those bad engineering designs that wasn't thought of until later, and then you had to go ahead and fix it. So that's one of the functional parts of our zoo that we had to kind of alter. I just want you guys to remember that this is a franchise zoo, so everything is money based in this game. So we can't go ahead and do these awesome, crazy things like other people can do in creative. So we are on a budget. We want to make sure that our staff are doing what they should be doing, that they're being handled properly, but also not spending a whole lot of money on them. Now, toward the front of this area, I did want to give this area a little bit of a centerpiece and a little bit of a starting point for our future into this little plot of land. So we end up building this little bear here, and we end up putting in like basically like a little garden and kind of raise it up a little bit. That bear is not East Asia themed, but it is actually part of the New World Pack, but I think it would work well in this area anyway, because that building back there toward our viewing pavilion is a little bit more modern. We do mix it with that little bit of old but yet new, and we also do bump out the pathway a little bit, and we don't really know what to do with it for right now. But if you guys do have any suggestions, please let me know, because our next project is going to be fixing up this area right here. So that's right, this area right here is a nice little slope, but I want to try to get in maybe a gift shop or two in this area somehow. We do have the monorail that does come by through this area, which by the way we do have custom pillars for, which is awesome. So we do have that in the way a little bit. We will have some overgrown trees most likely, but I want to try it in a gift shop. But as of for now, that is all for this video. So if you guys did enjoy this video, please give it a thumbs up, as it would help support out this small YouTube channel. I would highly appreciate it. Subscribe if you have not subscribed already, and be sure to give me those suggestions and comments down below. I like to hear from you guys and I will respond. But that is all for this video, so I shall see you guys in the next video. Goodbye.